Ever wondered what happened behind the scenes of the groundbreaking film that brought Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny together on screen for the first and only time? From an actor who hallucinated cartoon characters for months after filming rap to a voice actress who went into labor while recording her lines, the making of Who Framed Roger Rabbit is filled with bizarre stories that rival the zaniness of Toontown itself. Some of these tales are hilarious, others are downright disturbing, but all of them reveal the extraordinary lengths filmmakers went to create this revolutionary masterpiece. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Fact 1. Bob Hoskins hallucinated cartoon characters for months. Bob Hoskins didn't just act alongside cartoon characters in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, he actually saw them, and that became a serious problem that lasted long after the camera stopped rolling. To prepare for his role as Eddie Valiant, a detective who interacts constantly with animated characters that weren't actually there during filming, Hoskins knew he needed to do something unusual. He started studying his young daughter Rosa, who had an imaginary friend named Jeffrey, carefully watching how she played with and responded to someone only she could see. Through intense concentration and practice, Hoskins taught himself to genuinely hallucinate the cartoon characters during filming, making his performance incredibly convincing because he was truly seeing Roger Rabbit, Jessica Rabbit, and the weasels right in front of him. The crew members working on the film were amazed by Hoskins' ability to nail his sight lines perfectly, focusing on exactly the right empty spots in space where the animated characters would later be drawn in, and he could interact with invisible objects as if they were really there. But after 8 months of filming wrapped up, Hoskins discovered he had created a problem he couldn't easily fix. He had trained his brain so thoroughly to see these cartoon characters that he couldn't simply turn the hallucinations off when production ended. For months afterward, Hoskins would be sitting somewhere completely normal, having a regular conversation, when suddenly a cartoon weasel would appear, creeping out of a wall right in front of him. In one particularly memorable incident, Hoskins attended a formal event where he found himself talking to a very proper woman wearing a large, fancy hat, and he saw a weasel sitting right there in her hat, as clear as day. His doctors initially recommended he take about 5 months off from work to recover, but Hoskins knew he needed more time than that. He ended up taking a full year away from acting, not appearing in another film until 1990, when he starred in Heart Condition. Hoskins later admitted that he went a bit mad during the production, saying he had trained himself to hallucinate, and in the end, it screwed up his brain. Fact 2. Charles Fleischer wore a Roger Rabbit costume. On set. When most voice actors record their lines for animated characters, they stand in a sound booth somewhere far away from the actual film set. But Charles Fleischer, who voiced Roger Rabbit, took a completely different approach that left everyone on set either impressed or deeply confused. Fleischer insisted that the costume department create a full Roger Rabbit suit for him to wear while performing on set, complete with rabbit ears, red overalls, white gloves, and everything else that made Roger look like Roger. He wasn't just recording his voice in some studio. He was right there on the soundstage with Bob Hoskins and the rest of the cast, dressed head to toe as a cartoon rabbit. Fleischer believed this method would help him get into character more authentically, and he also thought it would give Bob Hoskins something tangible to react to while acting opposite thin air. Since all the animated characters would be added in later during post-production, Hoskins had to pretend Roger was really there during filming, and Fleischer figured that having an actual person in a rabbit costume delivering the lines in real time would make the whole thing easier and more believable. According to Fleischer himself, he wanted to follow the same routine any actor would: go to set, go to the trailer, put on the costume, and perform. He didn't want to just show up in the same pair of corduroy pants every day while filming in England. The unintended consequence of this dedication was that crew members from other productions being filmed at Elstree Studios would occasionally see Fleischer walking around in his rabbit costume, maybe heading to the commissary or just taking a break between scenes. These people had no context for what they were seeing and genuinely thought this costumed character was how Roger Rabbit would actually appear in the finished film. Word got around the studio that the Rabbit movie was going to be a disaster because someone had spotted the guy playing Roger Rabbit, and he didn't even look like a real rabbit. It's almost funny to think that Fleischer's genuine attempt to help the film ended up making other people think it was doomed to fail. Fact 3. Kathleen Turner was uncredited and pregnant during recording. One of the most peculiar behind-the-scenes stories from Who Framed Roger Rabbit involves the iconic voice behind Jessica Rabbit and the timing of her recording sessions. Kathleen Turner, the acclaimed actress known for her distinctive husky voice in films like Body Heat and Romancing the Stone, provided Jessica Rabbit's sultry speaking voice, but her name was nowhere to be found in the film's original credits. Only Amy Irving, who performed Jessica's singing voice for the song Why Don't You Do Right, received official credit when the movie was first released in 1988. Turner's involvement remained a secret to most audiences, even though her voice work was essential to creating one of cinema's most memorable animated characters. The reason behind Turner's uncredited performance reveals an even stranger detail about the recording process. In a 2017 interview, Turner explained that she accepted the role precisely because she was pregnant at the time, and the job seemed easy enough. She simply had to show up and record her voice without the physical demands of a traditional acting role. However, the timing became far more dramatic than anyone anticipated. Turner later revealed that her water broke while she was actually recording Jessica Rabbit's dialogue, meaning she went into labor during the very session that would cement Jessica's place in movie history. Director Robert Zemeckis had specifically brought Turner on board because he had worked with her previously on Romancing the Stone and knew her voice would be perfect for the seductive but ultimately loyal Jessica. The combination they created, Turner's speaking voice paired with Irving's singing, gave Jessica Rabbit a complexity that helped make the character more than just a cartoon femme fatale. Despite the dramatic circumstances of the recording and Turner's crucial contribution to the film's success, her work remained uncredited until later home video releases finally acknowledged her role. Turner has since noted with amusement that fans ask her to sign photos of Jessica Rabbit more often than pictures of herself. Fact 4. In the original novel, Roger actually dies. If you thought Who Framed Roger Rabbit was a light-hearted romp through Toontown, you'd be shocked to discover what happens in the original book. The 1981 novel that inspired the film, titled Who Censored Roger Rabbit, tells a much darker story where Roger Rabbit doesn't just get framed for murder, he actually gets killed right at the beginning. Author Gary K. Wolfe created a noir mystery that was far more violent and adult than anything Disney would ever dream of making. And the differences between the book and the movie are absolutely staggering. In Wolfe's original novel, Roger is found shot dead in his apartment early in the story, with a gaping bullet hole described in gruesome detail that you'd never see in a family film. The detective Eddie Valiant isn't trying to prove Roger innocent of a crime. He's investigating Roger's actual murder, but here's where it gets even weirder. In the book, cartoon characters called Toons have the ability to create temporary duplicates of themselves known as doppelgangers, which only last about 72 hours before disintegrating. Most of the story actually follows Roger's doppelganger trying to solve his own murder alongside Eddie. The really dark twist comes at the end when it's revealed that the original Roger Rabbit was actually a murderer himself. Driven by jealousy over his wife Jessica's affair with a character named Rocco DeGreasy, Roger killed Rocco and planned to frame Eddie Valiant for the crime. The novel's version of Jessica is nothing like the devoted wife from the movie. She's portrayed as a manipulative gold digger who detests Roger and uses men for money and power. Roger's doppelganger, despite being created by a murderer, actually develops genuine friendship with Eddie and expresses regret before dissolving into dust at the story's conclusion. Gary Wolfe himself has admitted that his original book was way darker than the film, stating in interviews that maybe 35 people actually read his novel compared to the billion-dollar movie phenomenon. When Disney bought the rights, they completely reimagined the story, transforming it from a gritty noir murder mystery into the beloved family classic we know today. Fact 5. Tim Curry was too terrifying for Judge Doom. When it came time to cast the villain for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the filmmakers knew they needed someone who could pull off being both menacing and memorable, but finding the right balance turned out to be surprisingly difficult. Tim Curry, the actor famous for playing terrifying characters like Pennywise the Clown in the 1990 television version of Stephen King's It, and the delightfully wicked Dr. Frankenfurter in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, seemed like a natural choice for the sinister Judge Doom. He auditioned for the role, and by all accounts, his performance was absolutely chilling and completely convincing as the villain who planned to wipe out Toontown with his deadly dip solution. The problem was that Curry was too good at being scary. Director Robert Zemeckis, producer Steven Spielberg, and Disney executives Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner all watched Curry's audition and came to the same conclusion. His portrayal of Judge Doom was simply too terrifying for what was supposed to be a family-friendly film that children would watch alongside their parents. The rejection of Tim Curry sent the casting team back to the drawing board, and they began considering a surprisingly wide range of actors for the part. Christopher Lee, the legendary British actor known for playing Count Dracula in the Hammer horror films, was approached but ultimately turned down the role. On the completely opposite end of the spectrum, comedian John Cleese from Monty Python expressed interest in playing Judge Doom, but the producers felt he wasn't scary enough to pull off the character's dark and menacing presence. The list of potential Judge Dooms kept growing and included some truly unexpected names like Peter O'Toole, F. Murray Abraham, Roddy McDowall, and even the rock star Sting, showing just how difficult it was to find someone who could strike the perfect balance between frightening and family appropriate. In the end, Christopher Lloyd got the part, largely because he had already worked successfully with both Zemeckis and Spielberg on Back to the Future, where he played the eccentric but lovable Doc Brown, proving he could handle complex characters that audiences would remember long after the credits rolled. Fact 6. Christopher Lloyd never blinked on camera. Christopher Lloyd's performance as Judge Doom in Who Framed Roger Rabbit is genuinely terrifying, and part of what makes the character so unsettling comes down to one specific choice the actor made that most viewers never consciously notice. Throughout the entire film, Lloyd deliberately avoided blinking his eyes whenever he was on camera as Judge Doom, creating an unnaturally intense and predatory gaze that added an extra layer of menace to the already frightening character. Lloyd came up with this idea himself while developing the character, reasoning that since Judge Doom was secretly a Toon disguised as a human, he wouldn't actually need to blink to keep his eyeballs moist the way real humans do. In interviews, Lloyd explained his thought process by saying that he just felt a Toon doesn't have to blink their eyes to re-moisten their eyeballs because they're not human. So Judge Doom should never blink. And this would make him even more ominous and scarier if he's just looking at people with that unblinking stare. While this might sound like an easy acting choice, maintaining an unblinking stare for extended periods is actually quite difficult and uncomfortable. Lloyd had to carefully time his takes and keep his eyes open as long as he possibly could between shots, planning out when he could finally blink once the camera stopped rolling. He considered it worth the discomfort because these little details helped make Judge Doom even more evil and unsettling as a villain. What makes this choice even more clever is that it serves as subtle foreshadowing for the film's big twist reveal. When Judge Doom is finally exposed as a Toon in disguise during the climactic scene, the unblinking eyes suddenly make perfect sense in retrospect. Viewers who go back and watch the film a second time often pick up on this detail and realize that Lloyd was giving clues about Doom's true nature throughout the entire movie. The unblinking stare that seemed creepy and inhuman was actually completely accurate, because Judge Doom really wasn't human at all. Fact 7. Most expensive film of the 1980s. When Who Framed Roger Rabbit hit theaters in June of 1988, it carried a staggering price tag of $70 million, making it the most expensive film ever produced up to that point in cinema history. To put this in perspective, the film's budget was roughly $150 million in today's money, an astronomical sum that reflected the incredible technical challenges of combining live-action footage with hand-drawn animation on such an ambitious scale. The production had actually started with a much more modest budget of $30 million, which Disney executives initially considered too expensive and nearly killed the project before it even began. After Steven Spielberg came on board as producer and the studio greenlit the film, costs began to escalate rapidly as the true scope of the technical requirements became clear. By the time cameras stopped rolling and the animation work wrapped up, the budget had more than doubled to over $50 million and eventually reached its final total of $70 million once all post-production costs were factored in. What made Roger Rabbit so expensive was the painstaking nature of every single shot that featured animated characters interacting with the real world. The film required 326 animators working for 14 months in post-production alone, with each frame of animation drawn by hand and carefully composited into the live-action footage. When you consider that there are 55 minutes of animation spread throughout the film's 104-minute runtime, and that animation runs at 24 frames per second, the sheer volume of hand-drawn artwork required was unprecedented. The previous record holder had been Rambo 3, which had cost $58 million and was released just weeks before Roger Rabbit in May of 1988. Who Framed Roger Rabbit held on to the title of most expensive film ever made for 3 years until James Cameron's Terminator 2 Judgment Day claimed the crown in July of 1991 with a budget of $100 million. Despite the enormous financial risk, Disney's gamble paid off spectacularly when the film grossed over $351 million worldwide. Fact 8. Bumping the lamp became an animation industry term. There's a scene in Who Framed Roger Rabbit where Detective Eddie Valiant takes Roger into the back room of a bar to saw off a pair of handcuffs. And during this scene, Eddie accidentally bumps his head into a low-hanging ceiling lamp, causing it to swing back and forth throughout the entire sequence. Most viewers watching the movie probably didn't think twice about this moment, but what happened behind the scenes to create it has become legendary in the animation world. The swinging lamp meant that the lighting in the room was constantly changing, casting moving shadows across everything, including Roger Rabbit himself. Since Roger was an animated character who would be added in later, the animators had to painstakingly redraw him frame by frame to match the constantly shifting light and shadows as the lamp swung around. This wasn't just a matter of drawing Roger once or twice differently. The animation team had to account for every single frame where the light changed, carefully studying how the shadows would fall on Roger's body and adjusting his appearance to match the real-world lighting in the room. The team was fully aware that most audience members would never consciously notice this detail, but animation director Richard Williams insisted on doing it anyway because it would make Roger feel more real and truly present in the physical space. This incredible dedication to a detail that would likely go unnoticed by 99% of viewers ended up creating a new phrase in the animation industry. Today, when animators and special effects artists talk about bumping the lamp, they're referring to the act of putting in tremendous effort on a particular effect or detail that audiences will probably never notice, but which adds to the overall quality and believability of the final product. It's become a way to describe going that extra mile in pursuit of excellence, even when nobody might consciously appreciate the work that went into it. Fact 9. Disney and Warner Brothers required equal screen time. Getting Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny to appear in the same film wasn't just a creative challenge. It was a carefully negotiated legal agreement that required perfect mathematical equality between the two rival animation studios. Warner Brothers agreed to let their biggest stars, Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, appear in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but they had one non-negotiable condition that would shape some of the film's most memorable scenes. The studio demanded that their characters receive exactly the same amount of screen time as Disney's iconic Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. ensuring that neither company's mascots would be overshadowed by the competition. This unprecedented requirement led to a unique solution that viewers might not have consciously noticed, but can clearly see once they know what to look for. Every single appearance by a Warner Brothers character is perfectly matched with a Disney character in the same scene, creating what essentially became a series of animated duets throughout the film. When Daffy Duck and Donald Duck appear together, they engage in a wild piano battle at the Ink and Paint Club, each character getting equal moments to shine as they frantically compete to outplay each other. Later in the film, when Eddie Valiant is falling from a building, both Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse appear together in a parachute scene, floating down alongside Bob Hoskins and delivering their lines in perfect balance. This careful pairing even extended to the film's ending, where Porky Pig's famous "That's all folks" stutter is immediately followed by Tinker Bell flying across the screen, ensuring both studios got their iconic closing moments. Steven Spielberg's negotiating skills made this delicate balance possible, convincing both Disney and Warner Brothers that sharing the spotlight would benefit everyone involved. The result was a historic first, and still the only time to this day, that characters from these two rival studios have appeared together on screen, making Who Framed Roger Rabbit a unique moment in animation history that required legal contracts to ensure complete fairness between the competing cartoon kingdoms. Fact 10. Hidden frames caused a Laserdisc buying frenzy. When Who Framed Roger Rabbit was released on Laserdisc in 1990, it quickly became a favorite among home video collectors who appreciated the format's superior picture quality. But in March of 1994, the disc suddenly became one of the most sought-after items in the entire home video market for a completely different reason. The entertainment trade publication Variety reported that sharp-eyed viewers had discovered several frames of animation that appeared to show Jessica Rabbit without any underwear during a scene where she's thrown from Benny the Cab and spins through the air. The moment in question happened so quickly that it's completely undetectable when watching at the normal speed of 24 frames per second. But Laserdisc players allowed viewers to advance through the film frame by frame, making it possible to examine individual images that would otherwise flash by in an instant. The specific frames that caused the controversy were frames 2170 through 2172 on side 4 of the Laserdisc version, where Jessica's dress rides up during her second spin and the coloring of her lower body appeared darker than her legs, leading some viewers to believe they were seeing something that wasn't meant for family audiences. The discovery sparked an immediate media frenzy, with news outlets including CNN and major newspapers running stories about the alleged hidden content. Retailers reported that their entire inventory of the Laserdisc sold out within minutes of opening on the day the story broke, and they received calls from collectors all over the country desperate to get their hands on a copy. The run on the disc was so intense that many stores that normally moved around 30 copies per month sold out of 6 copies in a single morning. Whether the frames were intentionally drawn by mischievous animators or simply the result of a coloring error where Jessica's underwear blended too closely with her skin tone has never been definitively answered. What is certain is that the controversy turned a 6-year-old home video release into the hottest commodity in the market overnight, and the Jessica Rabbit Laserdisc became a permanent piece of pop culture history. Fact 11. The dip is based on real chemistry. One of the most chilling elements in Who Framed Roger Rabbit is Judge Doom's weapon of choice, a sinister green liquid called the dip that can permanently destroy cartoons who are otherwise nearly indestructible. What makes this plot device even more unsettling is that it's not just creative fiction. The dip is actually based on real science used in the animation industry. In the film, Judge Doom reveals that his deadly concoction contains 3 specific ingredients: turpentine, acetone, and benzene. These aren't random chemicals chosen to sound scary. They're actual paint thinners that were commonly used by animators to erase images from animation cells during the traditional hand-drawn animation process. Before the digital age, animators created cartoons by hand-painting characters onto transparent sheets called cells, which were then photographed frame by frame to create the illusion of movement. When mistakes were made, or when cells needed to be reused, artists would use solvents like turpentine, acetone, and benzene to literally dissolve and wipe away the painted images. The screenwriters Jeffrey Price and Peter Seaman cleverly took this real-world animation technique and transformed it into a terrifying in-universe logic. If these chemicals can erase a cartoon drawing in the real world, then in a world where cartoons are alive, these same chemicals would effectively erase the toons themselves from existence. This attention to detail adds a layer of dark authenticity to the film's noir atmosphere. The famous scene where Judge Doom demonstrates the dip's power by slowly lowering a squeaking cartoon shoe into a vat of the bubbling liquid remains one of the most disturbing moments in any family film, precisely because the threat feels genuine and irreversible. By grounding this fictional weapon in actual chemistry and animation history, the filmmakers created something that resonates as truly dangerous rather than just another cartoon gag. The dip represents a very real erasure, making Judge Doom's plan to destroy Toontown all the more menacing, and giving the film's stakes an unexpected weight that elevates it beyond typical animated fare. Fact 12. Nancy Cartwright voiced the murdered shoe. One of the most emotionally devastating moments in Who Framed Roger Rabbit happens early in the film, when Judge Doom demonstrates the terrifying power of his toon-killing dip by dunking an innocent cartoon shoe into a vat of the deadly chemical mixture. The little shoe squeaks and whimpers desperately as it's lowered toward the bubbling liquid, creating a scene that traumatized countless children in 1988 and remains one of the film's darkest moments even today. What makes this scene even more interesting is that those heartbreaking squeaks and cries were performed by Nancy Cartwright, a relatively unknown voice actress at the time, who would go on to become one of the most recognizable voices in animation history just 1 year later. Cartwright was hired to provide the vocal sounds for the doomed shoe, even though the character never actually speaks any words throughout the entire sequence. Her job was to create the pitiful squeaking and whimpering noises that would make audiences feel genuine sympathy for what is essentially just a cartoon piece of footwear. She succeeded so well that the scene became one of the most memorable and disturbing parts of the entire movie, with many viewers reporting that they found it more upsetting than any of the film's other violent or scary moments. The shoe's helpless sounds, combined with its big, innocent eyes, created an emotional punch that caught audiences completely off guard in what they expected to be a lighthearted family comedy. Just 1 year after Roger Rabbit was released in theaters, Cartwright landed the role that would define her entire career when she was cast as the voice of Bart Simpson on a brand new animated series called The Simpsons, which debuted in 1989. She has voiced the mischievous 10-year-old boy for over 3 decades now, making Bart one of the longest-running characters performed by a single voice actor in television history. But before all that success and fame came her way, she was the voice of a cartoon shoe meeting its tragic end in a vat of chemical death, proving that even the smallest roles can leave a lasting impact on audiences. Fact 13. Bob Hoskins's son refused to speak to him. One of the most touching and amusing behind-the-scenes stories from Who Framed Roger Rabbit involves Bob Hoskins and his young son's reaction after watching the finished film. For 2 full weeks after the movie's release, Hoskins's son completely stopped talking to his father, giving him the silent treatment in what must have been a confusing and concerning time for the actor. When Hoskins finally managed to get his son to explain what was wrong, the boy's answer was both heartbreaking and adorable in equal measure. The young boy told his father that he simply couldn't believe that Hoskins had spent months working alongside some of the most famous cartoon characters in history: Bugs Bunny, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Daffy Duck, and so many others, and never once brought him to the set to meet them. From the child's perspective, his father had been given an incredible opportunity that any kid would dream of, the chance to hang out with beloved cartoon stars, and he had selfishly kept it all to himself without sharing this once-in-a-lifetime experience with his own son. Of course, the irony of the situation was that none of these cartoon characters were actually present on set during filming. Bob Hoskins had spent the entire 8-month production pretending to interact with invisible characters, using mime techniques and his carefully developed ability to hallucinate their presence. The animated characters were only added during the lengthy post-production process, drawn frame by hundreds of animators over the course of 14 months. But to Hoskins' son, who had just watched his father seemingly interact with all these famous tunes on screen, it appeared completely real, and there was no way to explain to a young child that these weren't actual beings his father had met. The story perfectly captures the incredible success of the film's visual effects and animation work, which were so convincing that even the star's own child couldn't tell the difference between what was real and what was movie magic. Fact 14. Jessica Rabbit required 3 separate animation layers. When Jessica Rabbit steps onto the stage at the Ink and Paint Club to sing "Why Don't You Do Right?", audiences see what looks like a seamless performance by one of animation's most iconic characters. But the technical complexity behind that single scene was absolutely extraordinary. The animators didn't just draw Jessica as one unified character the way most animated figures are created. Instead, they had to animate her skin, her hair, and her dress as 3 completely separate layers that all had to move together in perfect synchronization. This meant that for every single frame of her performance, 3 different teams of animators were working on different parts of her body, and all of those individual pieces had to be composited together to create the final image that appears on screen. The reason for this incredibly labor-intensive approach was that each element of Jessica's appearance required different animation techniques and different visual effects to make her look as realistic and glamorous as possible, especially given that she was supposed to be a human-like toon interacting in a live-action world alongside real actors like Bob Hoskins. The most challenging aspect of animating Jessica was creating the sparkling, shimmering effect on her famous red sequined dress, which needed to catch and reflect light in a way that made it look like real sequins glittering under stage lights. The animation team came up with an ingenious solution that sounds almost absurd in its simplicity. They filtered light through a plastic bag that had been scratched up with steel wool, creating random patterns of light and shadow that mimic the way sequins scatter light in unpredictable directions. This effect had to be applied frame by frame to match Jessica's movements as she walked, turned, and posed during her musical number, which meant that the animators were essentially hand-creating the sparkle effect for every moment she appeared on screen. The entire process of bringing Jessica to life in that one nightclub scene took months of work and represented some of the most advanced animation techniques available at the time, pushing the boundaries of what could be achieved by combining traditional hand-drawn animation with innovative lighting and compositing effects that helped make Who Framed Roger Rabbit look unlike anything audiences had ever seen before. Fact 15. The film nearly shut down Disney animation. Before Who Framed Roger Rabbit hit theaters in 1988, the Walt Disney Company was in serious trouble, and the once mighty animation department that had built the studio's legacy was on the verge of being permanently closed. Throughout the early 1980s, Disney had released a string of animated films that failed to connect with audiences or critics, including The Black Cauldron in 1985, which became one of the biggest financial disasters in the company's history. The studio had lost its way, and executives were genuinely questioning whether traditional animation had any future at all in the modern entertainment landscape. When Disney first acquired the rights to Gary K. Wolfe's novel Who Censored Roger Rabbit in 1981, then-President Ron Miller saw it as a potential blockbuster that could save the struggling studio. However, the project went through years of development hell, with multiple directors turning it down and budgets spiraling out of control. It wasn't until Steven Spielberg came on board as producer and Robert Zemeckis signed on as director that the film finally got the green light. But even then, Disney executives remained skeptical about whether the ambitious hybrid of live action and animation would work. Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was Disney's studio chairman at the time, made a bold argument that convinced the company to move forward with the film. He believed that Who Framed Roger Rabbit would not just be another movie, but would actually save Disney's animation department from extinction. The gamble paid off spectacularly when the film opened in June of 1988 and became an instant sensation, grossing over $351 million worldwide and becoming the second highest-grossing film of the year behind Rain Man. The success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit proved that audiences still loved animation when it was done with creativity, quality, and innovation. This renewed confidence led Disney to greenlight The Little Mermaid, which was released just 1 year later in 1989 and launched what became known as the Disney Renaissance. Over the next decade, Disney produced an unprecedented string of animated masterpieces, including Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King, all of which can trace their existence back to the film that saved the animation department and reminded the world why Disney animation mattered.